Welcome back to my presentation and summary of Scarlet Heroes, the simple RPG system you can easily play solo or with only 2 players. In the first episode I did an overview of the main rules, and in this one I will be unveiling my technique for adapting monsters and classes from Dungeons & Dragons into Scarlet Heroes. These techniques will also work if you play Godbound and Heroes and Eidolons, and if you play something like old school role-playing, you may also get use out of them, since those rules also have a lot of similarities with Scarlet Heroes. Now, without further ado, here's how you can adapt D&D Monsters into your Scarlet Heroes adventures. I will be adapting monsters from the 2nd edition, the 3rd edition, and the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I haven't tried my technique with monsters from the 4th edition, because I'm less familiar with it. But I do expect my tips would also work well for those. Let's start with the 2nd edition, because that is the most straightforward method, and I kinda feel like Scarlet Heroes was made to work well with those kinds of rules. Moreover, you can find those rules very easily nowadays by just searching online with a query like AD&D Monster List or something similar, and you'll find quite a few results. For example, here are the stats for rats in the 2nd edition. You'll see there's a bunch of information listed for that monster, but we only keep the following: armor class, movement, hit dice, number of attacks, damage, and morale. First, armor class. Since D&D 2nd edition has a descending armor class, just like in Scarlet Heroes, you can keep this stat unchanged. Moving on, we have movement. This is trickier, because a basic human in the 2nd edition has 12, while in our game, a basic human has 30 feet. So you need to multiply this stat by 2.5 to get a good equivalent. For hit dice, here's how you proceed. Anything below 1 is changed to 1 hit dice. So if you have 1/2, 1/4, anything like this, it becomes a 1. If there is a plus in that row, for example, the Usquip has 3 + 1, you need to round the hit die. So if it has +1 or +2, you would round down. And if it has +3 or more, you would round up. After that, we have number of attacks. It stays as is, but each attack gets a bonus equals to the hit dice. So the rat and the giant rat each get +1, and the Usquip gets +3. Now, damage. Damage tells you how much is inflicted by one attack. Back then, they used damage ranges. So here the Usquip deals 2 to 12 damage, which in modern day role-playing we would read as 2d6. So you can divide the number on the right by the number on the left if you're confused to how you would get to that damage range. In Scarlet Heroes, the minimum attack is 1d4. So we would assign 1d4 to the rat and 1d4 to the giant rat. But maybe you won't like that, because wouldn't a rat be a lot weaker than a giant rat? And they would end up with the same damage. So to counterbalance this, we could say the profile for one rat actually describes a pack of 3 rats. Or if we really wanted, we could say the rat only deals 1d2 damage, but that would make it incredibly weak. Also, don't forget that in Scarlet Heroes, you resolve each damage die individually. And since the Usquip would inflict 2d6 on each successful attack, make sure you're not adding the die together before counting the damage. So it would actually deal from 0 to 4 damage on a successful hit. Then we move on to morale. Morale was from 2 to 20 in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, while in Scarlet Heroes it's between 2 and 12. Therefore, I came up with a chart to convert it from one system to the other. Here it is. Following my chart, the regular rats would have 3 or 4 in morale, and the giant rat would have 5 or 6. Finally, we give the creature a skill bonus between +1 and +3. In Scarlet Heroes, they tell you most creatures will have between +1 and +2, and exceptional ones will have +3 or higher. But that would be for like professionals and really powerful beasts. You would use them for skill checks the creature is good at doing. So we might say the rat gets a +1 for climbing and hiding. This part is more subjective though, so feel free to go with what feels right. Now to summarize this, here's an infographic I made. Alright, so this was a little bit long-winded, so let's do another monster to make it kind of clearer. I will go with the Minotaur. We take his armor of 6. We multiply his movement by 2.5 to give us 30 feet. We round up his hit dice to 7. We see he has 2 attacks per turn, with a bonus of +7 on account of his hit die. Moreover, according to his description, he can either attack twice with his horns, or bite and attack with a weapon. For damage, we convert the horns to 2d4, the bite to 1d4, and then I will refer to the weapon scores in Scarlet Heroes. There we see a two-handed axe or a flail would inflict 1d10 damage, so that's what we write. We convert his morale to 9, and we see it's written special. In this case, he would get a bonus of 3 points in morale when he is within his lair. So we convert this morale score and arrive at 10. Finally, we give him a +2 skill bonus for tracking his prey, or for doing anything that a Minotaur should be good at. Also, just as a fun aside, I tried applying this technique to convert the Tarrasque, which, if you don't know, it's supposed to be the strongest monster in D&D. And here's what you would get. As you can see, it would have a whopping 70 hit dice. So it would be insanely hard to kill, and it would always hit except on a 1. Plus, it has 6 attacks per turn. Suffice to say, you could never kill a Tarrasque by yourself in Scarlet Heroes. You would have to drop a nuke on it or something. And killing it with multiple characters would be very, very hard. However, you can see its profile is comparable to the Angelic Tyrant from Godbound, which is the strongest enemy in the free version of the rules. So a full party of 4 or 5 demigods would probably still have a really hard time fighting the Tarrasque, given that it could easily deal 44 points of damage every turn. But hey, that would be an awesome fight. Now, we move on to monsters from version 3 and 5 of Dungeons & Dragons. You'll see the technique is similar to how you convert monsters from the 2nd edition, apart from a couple of key differences with armor class and hit points. Also, note that I am partially basing my technique on this entry in Ericel's blog. However, I did make a few tweaks and changes to his approach, mainly to the armor class chart, because I thought higher armor classes were too OP, so I scaled them down a little bit. But I encourage you to check out his very useful post, and I will link it in the description. Here are the profiles for the Humber Hulk in version 3.5 and 5. Just like before, there is way more information than what we need. So we'll be focusing our attention on speed, armor class, full attack, special qualities, skills, and challenge rating. Since I want to follow the same order I used with the 2nd edition monsters, I will start with the armor class. But this is one of the most complex things to adapt. Unlike in the 2nd edition, the newer versions of D&D use an ascending armor class. So the higher it is, the more impervious the creature is to attacks. I created this chart to figure out the monster's equivalent armor class in Scarlet Heroes. I created the scaling to make armors retain almost the same defense value from one game to another, and to prevent creatures of very high armor values from becoming untouchable. In the case of our Humber Hulk, he would end up with an armor class of 3, which is roughly equivalent to a full plate of armor. Next, we have movement, and we just need to copy that one. After that, we have the creature's hit dice. This may seem confusing, but to convert monsters, it is better to look at the monster's challenge rating and convert that into our hit dice, rather than go with his health. This is because, unlike in version 2, hit dice can vary a lot in modern Dungeons & Dragons. For example, a skeleton has 2 hit dice, while being only 1/4 in challenge rating, whereas an undead cockatrice has 6 hit dice, even though it's just a bit stronger at challenge rating 1/2. This is why I find it's better to do the following. If your creature is challenge rating 1 or smaller, they get 1 hit dice, and then they have the same hit dice as they have challenge rating. Thus, our Umber Hulk would have 7 hit dice if converted from version 3.5, and 5 hit dice if converted from the 5th edition. Likewise, the skeleton would have 1 hit die, and so would the cockatrice. Now, here's what you could do to better account for the cockatrice's high number of hit dice in the original rules. You could give it 1 or 2 more hit dice in your converted stats, but you keep its damage bonus to +1 so it doesn't become overpowered. So basically you could inflate or decrease a creature's hit die, but you would want to keep the attack bonus roughly how its challenge rating was before you converted it. Next, we copy the number of attacks of the original creature, replacing the attack bonus with one equivalent to the new hit dice. Now for damage, we keep the same dice, but we don't copy the bonus. This is because only player characters get damage bonuses in Scarlet Heroes. Morale is another tricky part. I don't have a perfect answer to determine this number. The closest thing I have to a systematic formula is the following. I start with 6, and then I add the monster's original wisdom bonus. But sometimes that feels off. Instead, if you refer to Scarlet Heroes rulebook, it'll give you vague guidelines on assigning morale, so you could go with those. One thing is certain, if it says the creature is immune to being frightened, it should have a score of 12. Here I am going with my basic technique, so the monster gets a low score of 6. At this point you should assign a skill bonus, generally between +1 and +3. You could go higher, but I would only give 4 and above to legendary creatures. Here, Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition is very useful because it always tells you what the monster is good at. Finally, we can note down the creature's special attacks. This will have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, but I would basically try to keep them as intact as possible. Here, the monster's confusing gaze would make my character roll a saving throw, and on a failure, my hero would do a random action. Per Scarlet Heroes rules, the check would change to a wisdom saving throw with a difficulty of 9 plus the hit dice of the monster, so it would be either a 14 or a 16. Here is an infographic summarizing the above steps. As before, let's do another creature to make this feel more natural. I will go with a priest NPC from 5th edition. His armor class is converted to 6. His speed is kept at 25 feet. He gets 2 hit dice for being challenge rating 2. He has a mace as a weapon and spells. We will come back to these in a second. His damage is kept at 1d6 for the mace. Morale becomes 9 on account of his high wisdom. And he gets +2 as a skill bonus, and since he's good at medicine, persuasion, and religion, these are the areas where the bonus will apply. To convert the special attack and the spells, the easiest approach is to keep these as close as possible to the originals, while only modifying the saving throws and removing bonuses to damage. Thus, our priest would have a +2 to hit with his spells, and his spell save DC would be changed to a 9 plus his hit die, which amounts to an 11. For example, on his turn he could cast Spiritual Weapon as a bonus action, but it would only deal 1d8 of damage on a successful hit. Now we'll bring up the Tarrasque one more time, because I think it helps me illustrate an important point. As you can see, using my method, the Tarrasque from 3.5 would end up with 20 HP, while the Tarrasque from version 5 would have 30 HP. While it would make it a lot easier to beat in a proper campaign, like I could see 2 high-level characters from Scarlet Heroes actually being able to beat the one from 3.5, but I feel like it would be a little underpowered. When I see his original hit dice, I feel like we're nerfing it way too much. So when this happens and you feel like you're shortchanging a monster a little bit too much, here's what I suggest you do. The Tarrasque should have 48 hit dice plus an insane amount of health. So in this special case, I feel like I should at least take its hit die of 48. So the new version of its profile would be, okay, we keep its damage bonus at 20, but it would have 48 hit die, which is more than double, but it feels right for the Tarrasque. For the 5th edition Tarrasque, this would only raise its health by a little bit and bring it up to 33 from 30. So here's basically the rule that comes out of this. If a creature has a d20 as its hit die, and or if it has a really massive bonus in health, you should take its hit die to do its health and only have the attack bonus reflecting the challenge rating. Now, moving on to our second topic, here's how you can emulate D&D's common classes using Scarlet Heroes. Fighter, Cleric, and Rogue are not listed here for obvious reasons, while Bard, Monk, Paladin, and Ranger would be straightforward multi-classing options, so I will spare you the details. The most challenging classes to adapt would be Barbarian, Druid, and Sorcerer. You could probably modify the Fighter class to create Barbarians. To do so, I would probably say they start with 10 initial hit points, and they aren't allowed armor. But like in D&D, they can add their Constitution bonus to their armor class. So, since Scarlet Heroes uses a descending armor value, this would be 9 minus Dexterity modifier minus Constitution modifier. Now, the Druid is more straightforward, but it bears some explanation. I would play them just like Clerics, except they have the same restriction for armor and weapons as magic users, and like magic users, their free die is only 1d4, but they can use them to harm an enemy of any level. Also, to give them powers like fantasy druids usually have, I would repurpose Scarlet Heroes' rule for commanding undead creatures. Indeed, in Scarlet Heroes, Dark Clerics can choose to control the living dead using their Turn Undead skill instead of banishing them. Therefore, I would say that Druids can do the same thing to command animals. Finally, the most simple way to emulate a Sorcerer would be to simply play a magic user with a background like that of a Sorcerer from D&D. Otherwise, you could always try adapting more features, like the wild magic surges or meta magic. But I feel like you would be starting to overcomplicate things a bit too much. Up to you. Likewise, for spell users, you could use D&D spells and spell allocations, only changing your spell save DC to 9 plus your character level, and using Scarlet Heroes' rules for saving throws and damage. The only thing you would need to change is your spell save DC. It would become 9 plus your character level, and you would need to use Scarlet Heroes rules for saving throws and damage. But personally, I haven't tried playing like that so far. Instead, I've been using the spells from old school role-playing. But it does mean that at low levels, your wizard doesn't cast a lot of spells. However, it does keep things a lot simpler. Which brings me to my final point. I would highly recommend you start simple. Playing Scarlet Heroes using one of the 4 classes makes things very easy. and you are only re-adding complexity when you adapt classes and spells. So you may want to start by following the rules as closely as you can, and then adding in bits and pieces from your favorite RPGs to spice things up. That being said, I hope that with the tips I have outlined until now, those of you who are interested and daring enough will be able to adapt pre-made D&D adventures into their Scarlet Heroes games. I haven't taken that leap yet, but I bet it would be a ton of fun. And with that, I will end the video here. In the third part, I will go into more of a discussion of my experience playing Scarlet Heroes paired with Mythic Game Master Emulator, both solo and with another player. And I will also briefly compare that system with 2 other games from the same publisher. So if you're interested, I will see you in that video. I hope you found this useful. Don't hesitate to leave me a like or a comment if you did. Thanks for watching, and see ya!